So there's been a bit of a divide on the left for a while between classical Marxists and people who are fighting for social justice. So this is the second part in an ongoing series called 21st Century Marxism, where I'm looking at bringing Marxism into the 21st century. So in a recent video I made called The Future of Sex, up there if you want to check it out, I made a little offhand comment saying that I used to be more socially conservative, despite pretty much always being economically progressive, and that I've since come around to be more socially progressive because I've come to understand that you can't have true economic equality without also having social equality. And I think that the reason for this is pretty simple. I mean, Martin Luther King Jr. actually put the ideas together himself years and years and years ago. If you listen to a lot of his later speeches, MLK talks about wanting to create equality for not just black people, but for poor white people as well. And so really, the journey I went through was just the reverse of that, is saying that I wanted economic equality for poor people, and then through learning about intersectionality, then realized that, of course, the problems that I'm having as a lower class white person are not the entire story. That there's things that are stopping other people from progressing in addition to the things that are stopping me from progressing. Let's just have a think for a second about what would happen if we ignored social justice issues and achieved communism. So if money's like not a thing anymore, but there's been nothing to address the ongoing effects of colonialism and slavery, then you're going to inevitably wind up with different classes of people. And even if you abolish money, there's still going to be things that are valuable to people. Like, we're still going to have storytellers, and attention is still going to be something that people want because it's validating. And we're basically going to have the attention economy that we currently have, but without the capital associated with that. And so because of that, you're still going to get disparities in some kind of economy, most likely, unless there's specific things to address and regulate that. But if you're putting in things to specifically address and regulate that, then what you're trying to do is solve social inequality, meaning that you can't. Like, you're going to wind up with classes of people unless you work towards a world where everyone is equal. Not the same, but equal. And you don't get everyone being equal without doing things to address the things that made them unequal in the first place. And I know there's the argument of, I didn't do a genocide, so why should I have to help advocate for reparations for, intergenerational victims of genocide? And the answer is because it's not about guilt. It's about responsibility. The people who were responsible, if we're taking genocide as a single event, which, given that intergenerational trauma is a thing, doesn't really seem to be it. And also, it leads to the systemic issues that we're currently trying to deal with now. Anyway, if you take the creation of those things as an event, then the people responsible are dead. Or they're long gone one way or another. And so therefore can't be held responsible. So if they can't make reparations, does that mean that no one has to make reparations? And the answer is, well, that's not it, because genocide is not just an event. It has the spike at the front where people are trying to, kill everyone of a certain ethnicity or sexual orientation or whatever. But then you have the tail that goes on, where you have the flow-on effects from that, where the dominant class internalize all of the rhetoric that justified all this stuff, and maybe don't believe it as much, but there's still a greater, lesser kind of a dynamic that goes on there. And if you don't specifically try and address that, it sort of just becomes this unexamined underlying assumption, which can then be used to justify the further oppression of the marginalized group in question. And while that doesn't directly affect scientific facts, it certainly affects the interpretation of the data. And because humans are all about assigning meaning to things, the meaning that we assign to data is the important bit, because that determines what we're going to do with that data. So if we have a bias to seeing white people as being superior, for example, we're much more likely to find that in the data that we see, because we're more likely to come up with theories that explain the data looking at it through that lens. So because we as white people, for example, there are other dominant classes, are the beneficiaries of ongoing systemic inequality, it means that while it's not our fault that the situation is the way that it is, it's our responsibility to do it, especially as leftists who believe in equality and egalitarianism. What we're doing when we are fighting for the rights of people of color, for people of the LGBT community, for people who are neurodivergent, for people with mental or physical disabilities, for people who are of a vulnerable age. You know, the list of potential things that could give us biases against people is endless. If we don't do anything to address those inequalities, then they're going to turn into a class system down the line anyway. You cannot get rid of class without getting rid of the precursors to class. Well, and the precursors to class are things that separate people from other people and give one group an advantage over another, usually because of some historical injustice. Basically, it just boils down to division leads to class, and class leads to further division, with one group having power over another, which leads to exploitation, because through bias, hard factual data will be interpreted in such a way that will justify the dominant class being the dominant class. I started this video by saying that I used to be more socially conservative and have since become less socially conservative, but this is not actually how I got there. I didn't sit down and figure out, or have someone tell me and explain to me that you can't have economic equality without also having social justice. I went through a slightly different kind of realization, and I'm going to be talking about that approach a bit more in the next video. So subscribe if you want to see that. Give this video a like to let the algorithm know that leftist content is awesome. Leave a comment to do the same thing. Adding videos to playlists, by the way, is also helpful, which I've actually been doing for a lot of leftist videos that I like, which I'll link to down in the D box. I'm also a poet and a musician and a filmmaker and a couple of other things, and if you want to check out what I do, go to jamescfinlay.com. Again, link in the D box. And if you want to support me, both making these videos and making my art, you can get digital copies of all the art that I make for as little as $1 a month over on my Patreon, which again, down in the D box. And until next time, much love.